Okay, we are live this week with Anne Richardson from the American School in London. Anne, thank you so much for joining us.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me.
It's my pleasure. And you're the fourth person we've had on, but by no means the least important. It just means that you are the busiest, so we've had to wait this long to get you on. But do you want to just give everyone a bit of an introduction to who you are and what you do at ASL?
Absolutely. So I am the director of the Office of Student Advising at the American School in London. And the Office of Student Advising encompasses a team of deans, one for each high school grade 9 through 12. And it also encompasses a team of three university advisors, of which I am one. And so as a whole team, we are the advisors in multiple capacities for students at ASL and then also for their post-ASL plans.
Okay, so it's quite a big setup, would you say there?
Yes.
Yeah, it's certainly the biggest that I've ever come across. And you have students, what would you say the kind of demographic of your students is?
So ASL is a K1 through 12 school. It's an American curriculum. It's an American high school. We have students from all over the world. We have students who are British and who were born in London and just want the breadth of a US curriculum. We have American students whose parents have been posted to the UK for one reason or another. But then we also have an enormous number of students from multiple countries, multiple cultures, who speak multiple languages. It's a really wonderful global community.
That's great. And in terms of the sort of colleges that students go on to, do they mostly apply to America? Because that would be the assumption, given that it's the American school.
It is the assumption that all of our students go off to the United States for college and university. That is an inaccurate assumption. We have students who apply to many different countries. Our largest country, obviously, is the US, but that is closely followed by Canada and the UK. This year, we had students apply to over 13 different countries.
Wow, okay. And has that changed throughout your time at ASL?
So I've only been at ASL for 3 years, so that is a relatively short time, but certainly I would say that it is becoming much more common for students to look at multiple university options in multiple countries.
Okay, great. I think generally that's the message we're getting from everyone, that you would be forgiven for, I don't want to get too political, but you would be forgiven when you look at the news for thinking that countries are becoming more insular, but that seems to be the opposite amongst students in that they are looking more globally. Would you say that's the case?
So I think students have discovered that the world, up until 10 weeks ago, that moving around the world was relatively easy. And again, with the global community that we have at ASL, they have ties to multiple countries, and so it's natural for them to look at different situations. What I have found is that more and more students and their parents are considering the cost of university and college as a consideration. And then there are other considerations that come into play: citizenship, getting visas, things like that.
Okay. Yeah, cost is always a big one, of course, especially when we're talking about America, and it can be quite bewildering, if not expensive. How do you, I'm kind of going to skip around in terms of the timeline here, but how do you deal with that particular issue when you're advising students on where to go to college and how to apply?
Well, certainly citizenship is an issue when thinking about colleges and universities, particularly for families who have to consider finances very carefully. And so that is something that we always talk about, at the beginning of the process. I think it's really important for counselors and families to have good conversations about finances. Because it is really important for transparency within the family as to what is affordable and what is not, because that certainly is going to dictate where a student ends up going to university or college. So citizenship is important. Finances are important. And then from there, we begin to think about all the different options that are possible. Certainly, although the United States is very expensive, there has been the US citizens have the option to apply for financial aid. And certainly there are some universities that on paper look very expensive, but are very generous with financial aid. So it really behooves, it's where you get good counseling to know those colleges, develop good relationships with those colleges, and know how to advise students as to where to put in applications where they have the best possible chance of getting good financial aid and getting some merit money as well. I mean, merit money is a whole nother issue that sort of plays into the US piece of college applications. Clearly the UK is a wonderful option for UK students when it comes to international students. Again, that finances begin to come into it, and you begin to sort of think about that. But the UK is 3 years, the US is 4 years. So there are multiple things that play into this.
Yeah. And speaking of good counselling, one thing I did want to ask you is how you ended up becoming a college counsellor. I always like to hear people's stories on this front, because often it's not the job that people thought they were going to be doing. Not that any of us are doing the job that we thought we would be doing. Otherwise, I would be a spaceman now. But how did you end up getting into college counselling?
Well, it's really interesting. When I was in high school, I was going to be a pediatrician, and I actually took science A-levels in the UK and was sort of headed off in that direction. When I graduated from college, I was an English major. So I had a degree in English, so total U-turn there. And then was really loved teaching English. And when I was hired to teach at at a previous school, I was hired to teach and be the academic dean. And then in May, before I arrived, July 1st, the headmaster called me and said, "Oh, by the way," and it was always dangerous when he said, "Oh, by the way," because he said, "Oh, by the way, would you like to be director of college counseling?" And I looked at him and I said, "I've never been a college counselor in my life." And he said, "Don't worry, you'll love it. We'll send you to a summer institute. We'll get you a book. You'll be great." And he was right. He was right that I really did fall in love with college counseling. So I came into college counseling quite by accident and found it as something that I have absolutely loved. And and I was incredibly fortunate to have excellent mentors, to attend some amazing professional development, and then just to really fall in love with what I was doing.
And which other countries have you worked in now as a college counsellor?
So I've worked in the US and in the UK.
Okay. And well, I'm not going to ask you if you've got plans to work in other countries. I don't think that would be very nice to ASL. We hope, of course, that you stay in London forever.
Thank you.
So I know we can't have this conversation without noticing that you are not at home unless you are lucky enough to have a large room and a big library at home. So you're in school at the moment, which must be a new development.
Yeah, I'm actually at the American School in London. We are graduating our seniors over the next 3 days in carefully outdoors in 10-minute intervals, so that they each get to come by with their families and get their diplomas. So we're being very we're doing a lot of social distancing, but we're also trying to give each senior a moment of graduation.
That's really nice. So you're able to see every single one individually?
Well, those that are still in the country, yes.
Okay, yeah. And you were telling me just before this that it's a long process, because you see each one for 10 minutes. And you're not even halfway through yet. Is that right?
Yeah, I think by the end of today we'll be through the D's.
Okay, so just another 22 or so letters to go.
Yes.
So thinking about those students who are graduating this year, obviously they're looking forward to going off to college in September, but things, as we know, are a bit up in the air in terms of what it's going to look like when they go there. What is their feeling at the moment about their futures?
So I have a huge amount of admiration in my heart for the class of 2020. I think
Mm,
across the globe, these students have been remarkably resilient. They've had to pivot. They've had to deal with tremendous disappointment, and they are a historic class.
mm,
So a huge shout out first to the class of 2020. I think that they are, all of them, I think, are optimistic about college and university plans. Eventually, they recognize that for some of them, they will have to start virtually, and for others that they've had to take gap years that they had not planned on taking. There are some where it's going to be difficult for them to get to university, where I'm sure, as you know, the US Embassy is closed in London.
mm.
And so getting visa appointments is at a standstill at the moment. And that is causing anxiety for some of our seniors. Yeah, they've really, it's been a whirlwind of 10 weeks with
Mm.
them. And there's also been a significant amount of waitlist activity too. So when we print, this is where, this is where everybody is planning to go, that changes on a daily basis at the moment.
Mm. And do you find that students, because often I think that the way that us adults think that students are going to cope is completely different to how they end up coping. Often they're much more resilient than we give them credit for. Um, do you find that with their shift to online, they've coped completely well and will be fine once they get to university if that's the way it is? Or do you think they're going to be at a disadvantage?
So I think that I think distance learning has served some students really well, and some students not so well. I think that there are some students who it took a little bit longer to realize that how much in control of their day they are, and how much it is on them to get things done, get things read, get things written. But I think that all of them uh, are much more resilient and optimistic than perhaps sometimes the adults are. I
Mm,
think we as adults mourn for them because we had experiences that we loved in university, and their university experience is going to look different.
mm,
And for us, perhaps we equate different with worse, but I'm not sure that that's the case. I think that different is different. And these students are going to, I mean, this class will go down in history
mm.
as the class that modeled what going to college and university, what graduating from high school and going to college or university looks like in a post-pandemic world.
Mm.
So again, I I share their optimism that yes, it's going to look different, but they are going to make it a great experience.
Yeah, that's a good point. That, of course, we always think that university is about particular things, and I think even, I mean, obviously you visit a lot of colleges as well, Anne. And when I go to visit universities now, I always think it's not quite how I remember it being when I was at university. And that's because things change, and things I think have just changed very rapidly now. But I guess the interesting point there is, will it change back, and to what extent? Because obviously there's going to be a big change for students going this year, and a lot of students are going to have to cope with distant learning. But then if, as we all hope, things return somewhat to normal, will they then just go back to lectures being in person, and there won't be anywhere near as much online learning? Or will it be the case that actually people find that this was a better way to do things, and they stay doing remote learning much more? Um, there's not really a question in there, apart from I want a prediction from you, Anne, about how things are going to change.
I was going to say, boy, if I could say definitively, if I could answer that question definitively,
Mm,
I could earn millions at this point.
yeah.
Um, but no, I mean, I don't have a crystal ball. What I really hope is, clearly, I think that there are some good things coming out of um, good things coming out of these moments. I think it was Angel Perez, the new president of CEO of NACAC, who said, you know, with every crisis or every there's opportunity, and I think that is true. There clearly the rapid changes in technology, the use of Zoom and things like that have really transformed parts of teaching and learning in the last 10 weeks. And I guess it's my hope that we won't necessarily return to the old ways if this pandemic proves to have some really good new ways.
Yeah.
So that would really be my hope. I think it's hard to think about things returning to the way they were anytime soon. It's going to, whatever happens next fall, it's probably going to be a mixture. And there certainly are predictions that we may have to pivot back to distance learning, depending on where we are and what is happening in the world. So yeah, it's not going to look normal, but I think I really am hopeful that there are changes that will happen rapidly because of this that would not have happened so quickly. And I think you just need to look at the world of testing, for example, to see some of the huge changes that are happening there.
Yeah, that's a whole other topic that I'm sure we're going to come on to. But at ASL, have you got a kind of contingency plan for what will happen if you're not able to go back to school in September?
I know that the senior leadership team and the board of trustees have been working on plan A, B, C, D, E, F, and G for months. And certainly it is a concern. We want to make sure that if we do come back, that health and safety is a priority for students, for faculty and staff. And we are also dealing with a school that is K1 through 12. So there are multiple considerations there just because of that age spread. So yes, do we have plans? Do I know what they are? No, I don't. But I know that they have been working diligently on this. They've been reading other schools' plans, schools that have started to open up, overseas, and there's been a lot of research.
Well, I think if you implement a one-way system in ASL, it will actually be a plus point, because every time I come into ASL, I get completely lost. So a one-way system might actually help me find my way out of there.
I know. It is kind of a beehive, isn't it?
It is. Okay, I just want to take this opportunity to say to the people listening, you are welcome to ask questions. I can see quite a lot of people are tuned in. So you're more popular than you thought, Anne, but as popular as I knew you were. So you're welcome to ask questions. Anne is very experienced in terms of college counselling, and is also on a number of committees worldwide, which we'll talk about. And right on cue, I can see people asking questions. There we go. They've just been waiting, biding their time. So we'll take this opportunity to ask a few questions then. And here's a really nice one, actually. What is the best thing about being a college counsellor?
I think that the best thing about being a college counselor is working with the students, is starting that journey with the students and watching the growth and the different directions that a student takes from start to finish, and ending up with a student who is absolutely loving their post high school plans. I think there's nothing more rewarding than seeing that. That is the best part of being a college counselor, particularly for students who really do make it a journey, and you just see them grow through it. And even if they don't end up where they thought they wanted to end up, they usually end up in a place that is really a good place for them. So that's what I love about being a college counselor.
And have there been any particular highlights in your career as a college counsellor? Obviously, I don't want you to pick favourites, but do you have any highlights? I
think the highlights for me have been when a student has started the journey thinking for whatever reason that they are not worthy of university, whether it's they're a first generation university student, or whether they think they can't afford it, or whether they think they're not good enough, and and they have ended up in a sort of oh my goodness moment of, yeah, I really can do this, and somebody wants me, and I'm going to be able to to fulfill the dream. I
That's
think
a
those are
very nice highlight.
my most rewarding moments.
Yeah. So, with all your experience as a counsellor, what would you say, if you could kind of simplify a few tips that you've got for students to maximise their chances of success in their college applications? What would they be?
For students, so what I would say for students is, in high school, you need to follow your interests and pursue them to the greatest depth that you can. Do not think that there is some magic formula for going to college. You need X number of APs, or you need to go to this fancy summer program, or you need to do this. What you need to do is tell your story through the things that you do in high school. And that's not just about taking classes. It's about joining clubs, pursuing activities, trying something new. It's about failing and picking yourself up and moving on. And through high school, if you build a cohesive narrative about who you are and what you love to do, and you pursue that, that's going to get you into a great post ASL option. And I want to be very clear that we talk at ASL about post ASL options. We don't always talk about university and college. We talk about the military. We talk about postgraduate years. We talk about we talk about apprenticeships. It's not always about college and university. It's about pursuing a plan that is right for you and where you are going to be happy and successful and balanced.
A question from me related to that is how, because part of this process is also engaging with the parents through this. And sometimes the parents have got very different ideas about what they want for their children that you might have, or that the children might have. How do you deal with that, and how do you kind of mentor the parents through this whole process as well?
So it's every parent ultimately wants their child to be successful and happy and healthy. And that's really where we start, is that what's really important is, as we settle into this journey and plans, that we find a pathway and some institutions or some opportunities that are the best fit, where your student is going to be the most successful and happy. And I think if you go from that point of view, if you keep thinking that way with parents, generally speaking, you can kind of begin to help them understand that it's all about the child's dreams, not their dreams.
Sometimes that takes more time with some of them, with others, but you're absolutely right. Okay, another question here is, what strategies do you have for other counsellors, or other tips you've got for other counsellors in helping students stay engaged with the process, particularly now that you can't see them face to face all the time? How do you keep them going through this process now?
Yeah, so we have actually committed to a really stepped up communication with our particularly our juniors and their parents, and we really, to the point where we are committed to communicating with them through holidays and vacations, and making sure that they are on track to get to where they want to be by the time applications are due. So stepped up communication, I think, is really important. I think in this particular moment, one of the things we've really focused on is how to do good virtual research. and again, this comes back to what we talked about earlier. There is a formula in parents' minds that in order to be able to select a university, you must visit, you must interview, you must do this. That's kind of gone out of the window for this particular class. Again, that doesn't mean it's worse. It just means we have to do things differently. And differently means really taking advantage of all the things that admissions offices are doing. I mean, students for the first time have access to professor chats in certain universities. They have access to virtual tours that are far more detailed than they've been before. And all these admissions officers who are not able to travel are really willing to get online and chat with you and hold sessions and things like that. So it's figuring all of that out and encouraging students to, and their parents, to kind of switch to doing different research that doesn't necessarily mean it's worse.
I think we'll come back in a bit to other things that students can be doing with their time now, or maybe things they shouldn't be doing. But there's a great question here, which is when students are in their counselling sessions with you, or with another counsellor, of course, what things should they be asking and in those sessions in order to get the most out of those things?
So I think the sessions with us are really conversations about, they're conversations about where you are in the process and what the next steps are. So I think it's really about getting to know your students well, understanding where they are, meeting them where they are, and then carefully laying out the next steps for them, and understanding that there's, when you're counseling a student, as I'm sure all counselors and advisors know, there's no one size fits all. You know, the way you work with one student is not necessarily the way you work with another student. And so I think part of good counseling is really getting to know your students well, and understanding how they work, and then carefully moving them on step by step. And, you know, in terms of how there's the sort of one-on-one journey that you're doing with the students, and then there are sessions that we do for students that multiple students can attend, and those are sort of carefully staggered through the year, and again are sort of benchmarks of where students should be at certain times during the year. So for example, next Monday we're having a virtual junior college and university day where we'll offer multiple sessions for students to Zoom in, and we'll set up the Common App account, for example, or we'll set up the UCAS account, and we'll talk about essays, and we'll talk about supplemental essays, and we'll talk about, you know, what COVID-19 means for admissions. And so there's multiple sessions, and we just sort of do things like that throughout the school year so that students can attend in one way, shape, or another as part of that journey.
Okay, great. Well, this is a good opportunity to maybe go into a little bit more nitty-gritty on the counselling side of things. And you've mentioned the Common App and the essays and stuff now. For those students and parents listening who might not know as much about that side of things, particularly with American applications, do you want to kind of explain the key things they've got to get right, and at what points in order to maximize their success there?
So I think for US university applications, I think the key the key point is to do good research do good research for your list. I mean, the United States is a vast, huge country. It is very regional. I mean, and so I think it's really important to understand where the college is in the United States. I think it's really important to understand relative sizes. I think it's really important to understand the teaching style and the expectations. So do good research, I think, is the first piece. And really, and again, take advantage of all the virtual opportunities online. At this point in a junior, for a junior, now is a good time to begin thinking about the summer and how you're going to kind of structure your summer holidays. If you need to know what kind of application system the universities that you picked use. Most universities in the United States use the Common Application. However, there are big publics that have their own application system. The University of California system has its own application. And so it's really important to first know what kind of application is going to be needed. 2, understand what the different deadlines mean. And 3, understand what the different decision plans mean. And once you kind of have a sense of that, and on some kind of spreadsheet is probably the easiest way to do that, you then want to set up those admissions accounts, bearing in mind when those accounts become live. So the University of California system will start their application, at some point in the summer. The Common App, you can do a Common App account now, but you need to remember to roll it over on August 1st. And so you just got to understand how that looks. And then most university applications will require some kind of essay. Hang on. And so brainstorming that essay is going to be important to do as well.
So with the essays, this is obviously a part of the application that is quite time consuming, because and often students don't realize how long it's going to take and how many they're going to have to write. And the other problem that we sometimes find is that students often think that their story or the story they want to tell is unique, and they don't realize that they need to find something much more personal to them. Do you want to talk a little bit about that and how students go and find those bits of their personality or experience that they should really be thinking about?
So the essay for the United States, hang on, sorry. The essay.
If you need me to keep talking, I can just keep talking out. It's fine.
The essay for the United States is usually what we call a personal essay, and that really is a story that you want to tell about something that you are super interested in, or that reveals a part of you that you think is really important. Now, the one thing that I would say is, if you've looked at the updates for the Common App, there is a section on the Common App for next year where students can talk about COVID-19 related issues. And so I think that it's going, unless there is a compelling story of growth and understanding that happened during COVID-19, it's better not to make your main essay about COVID-19, even though that is clearly the biggest thing that has happened to everybody this year. So I would caution about that. What you decided to do during COVID-19, if you decided to take up, painting or pottery, or you decided to run a marathon in your backyard, that can be a great story to tell. But stories of hardship about COVID-19 are best kept to that special section that the Common App has done. Really, with the Common App essay, what I would say to students is that this is very rarely a one and done essay. This is an essay that is going to require multiple drafts, and there are going to be quite a few drafts where you start something and you think this is no good, you're going to tear it up and start again. And so that's why we really want juniors to kind of start their drafts in the summer, because starting to write your Common App essay when you return to school in the autumn is really going to be difficult, because it doesn't just spill out. It takes time. And the best essays that I've read are from students who pick something that they're really interested in or passionate about, and they write about that. And it can be about, you can write about, something as mundane as, work, a job that you have in, a fast food outlet or a charity shop. And it can be something as elevated as, an arcane piece of philosophy that somehow grabbed you in a class last year. And that's what you want to write about.
Yeah, that's great tips there. And I think what you said about COVID-19 is really important. And I want to talk a little bit about that, because it's very strange, I think, because on the one hand, we know how awful it is and how much it's affected everyone's lives. On the other hand, there's an incredible amount of space and time to do things suddenly. As a lot of it is very, very mundane from the personal point of view, unless you've been unlucky enough to be affected by it. And you've talked already about students making the most of their time now, and they actually have an unprecedented amount of time that they wouldn't have otherwise had. And you've already talked a bit about the sorts of things they can do. Have you got any other tips for how they could be using this time wisely?
So one of the things that has become very clear for the class of 2021 is that their summer plans have been completely upended by COVID-19. I mean, all the summer programs that they've kind of thought they were going to do, you know, the camps that they were going to, the jobs that they were going to have in many ways, they've either disappeared or they've gone online. And so one of the things that we're really encouraging the class of 2021, and this is where we've tried to be super helpful, is to find programs and online courses and virtual volunteering opportunities that they can do because, you know, what they thought they were going to do has disappeared. So it's again, they've had to pivot and think about doing new things, but there are a lot of things that are appearing for students to do. There's a lot of virtual volunteering that can happen. I mean, even if you spend all summer, you know, baking a different set of cookies each week to take around to your local care home or something like that, that I think is a great use of the great summer plan in this particular time. So I think, again, we have to be creative. We have to encourage students to look for opportunities. I will say that service is something that is always well received, both by, you know, if you are genuinely doing good service to others, it's usually very well received, and it's a great thing to write about as well.
Yeah, that's a good tip. I think the point about service is always a good one. And I think students at this time sometimes struggle to think of ways that they could get involved in community service because they think, well, I can't go outside or I can't interact with other people. But actually, there's a lot of stuff you can be doing, like volunteering to phone up shielding residents and that sort of thing. So plenty of stuff for students to do. And
absolutely. You know, call your local care home and become a pen pal to the people in there. That you can do from home.
Yeah.
You know, there's lots of ways in which you can serve. Exactly.
Great. Okay, let's move on to the big topic that we haven't talked about yet, which is testing. It's always the biggest thing that people think about at the start of the process anyway, because it takes so much time to get these tests right. I always say to my students that testing is both the most important and least important part of the application, because it's the most important because it's probably the first thing you're going to think about, and it's going to take up a lot of your time in terms of revision and planning for these tests, and you're probably going to do them several times. But then it's also least important because in the end, there are so many other bits of the application that really demonstrate who you really are. And you shouldn't just get hung up on the test scores. At this time, obviously, there's been a lot of changes in tests, and we're seeing test dates cancelled, new ones put in. There's been a lot of talk about at-home testing, which has then been delayed. Do you want to kind of summarize your feelings about the tests at the moment? I should say that, Anne, you were the chair of the ad hoc testing committee for the International ACAC, and you either were or are on the task force for standardized testing at NACAC. Are you still on that task force as well? Great. So Anne has a lot of experience and knowledge about testing. So Anne, do you want to kind of explain what's going on and what your feeling is about it?
Well, clearly the testing world has been upended in many ways. And it has just been accelerated by the last 10 weeks. There has been the cancellation of tests this spring the complications of trying to set up new tests or online tests when they hadn't been doing online tests has clearly been complicated, to the point where the College Board, just announced that they are putting at-home SAT tests, they're putting those aside for the moment, and and for the College Board to urge the universities to be understanding about lack of access to testing, I think is an unprecedented, moment for us. The test optional movement has just exploded in the last 10 weeks. And it'll be really interesting to see what kind of momentum that movement sustains after next year. I think the University of California announcement about them possibly developing their own test and putting aside tests for the moment is also fascinating. I think the AP online testing, which did not go 100% smoothly, but for quite a few kids did go smoothly, was really an interesting experiment. So I think we are at, I think this is one of the great sort of crossroads for testing, and it'll be really interesting to see where this goes in the next 6 months.
Yeah, and I'm not going to ask you to make predictions, because people have been trying to get me to make predictions, and I've been wrong about most of them. But I agree with everything you said. I think it's very, very interesting and exciting in some ways. The AP online tests, obviously people are focusing on the things that went wrong, but as you said, for a majority of people, things went well and smoothly. And when they went smoothly, and you may beg to differ, but when things went smoothly, actually it was quite a nice experience for students. Was that generally the experience that you had at ASL?
Yeah, I mean, we certainly had our share of mishaps with uploading and things like that. And I was pleased to see that emailing in answers became an option the second week of testing, although that always did not go smoothly either. I would say that for the students for whom it did go smoothly, yes, it was manageable. We were fortunate here in the UK that our students were testing at 5 p.m., 7 p.m., and 9 p.m., which was not ideal, but certainly nothing like how some of the some students in the Far East had to test at sort of 1 o'clock in the morning. So I think that is untenable and unsustainable for students.
Yeah.
If this experiment is going to continue, I think that for a long time the issues of equity and access for international students has been problematic compared to the domestic students in the US. And I think this spring, the domestic students have discovered what it's like to have tests canceled at a moment's notice and not be able to register at a test site near to them. And it is frustrating. It's really frustrating. And so I think all of that is kind of coming to a head. And it'll be interesting to see what direction this all goes in.
Yeah, I think that even with the at-home testing for the SAT, I think it will become the norm. And I think it will become the norm because we're already seeing that with some of the other tests. For instance, Duolingo English has been online for quite a while now. And the other major tests that we help with at UES are the graduate exams like GRE and GMAT. And they moved online instantly. They were at a big advantage because they had fully planned to do that in the future anyway, and they were already computer-based tests. But they moved online with almost no problems at all. And the experience that we've had from our students is that it's actually been quite nice because you're at home, you're in a comfortable environment. When you have your break, you can go and sit down on your sofa and drink a cup of coffee, but you can't do that in a test center. Some of the disadvantages are that students aren't quite used to the format, but they found that if they practice properly beforehand, then they know what to expect. I think the problem with the AP, I mean, I'm being maybe quite gracious towards the College Board here, but the problem with the AP was that everything was done extremely quickly, and with people not really understanding how it was going to work. So of course there were going to be problems. And I completely agree with you, Anne, that those sort of problems have got to be ironed out before SAT and ACT do the same. And they certainly can't just be run at the exact same time worldwide. That's a bit mad and a bit unfair. So if they can get that sorted and get it running smoothly and proctored properly, then I think it's a nice thing for students, because it should be more comfortable, and forcing students to travel miles to go to a test center is weird and not very fair.
Yeah. I think that the at-home testing has been complicated by the fact that it has been at home. I think that's been the big complication for online testing, is that its first rollout has been at home.
Yeah.
And home is not always the best place for good internet and wireless connectivity. And that's been a complication. So in terms of equity and access, at-home testing is not necessarily the answer. I think where Duolingo has found success is by having their test be able to be taken, anywhere.
Yeah.
And so, and that anywhere on a laptop. And I think that's really the key to the future, is getting things onto laptops so that students can go and take tests in a place where they do have the good internet access. They can take a test on a laptop in a school, but at a time of their own choosing. And that, I think, is key. So I would love to just, and this is just me personally speaking, I would love to envision a world where a student says, okay, I'm ready to take the SAT. I would like to go and sit down and spend the next 3 hours taking it, in a comfortable chair, now that I'm ready, with my laptop, and not necessarily have to, wait until a Saturday morning at 8 a.m. when no teenager is usually awake, and take it then.
Yeah, I agree. I think the ACT moves slightly in the right direction by moving on to computer and allowing afternoon testing. That has helped students a lot. Although I would point out the afternoon slots are always the first ones to go.
Of course,
everyone always wants them.
Of course.
But I agree. I think making the experience more comfortable for people, and I think there is a tendency for people to focus on the SAT and ACT because they're so important and such widespread tests. But of course, there are plenty of other tests, and students, as we all know, are going to be doing tests for most of their lives. Unfortunately, it's a pretty convincing way of finding out whether someone knows the knowledge or not. Whether you think they need to know that knowledge is another matter, and that's probably the biggest argument against the SAT and ACT.
Well, I might argue a little with you about that, because I'm really interested to see how the higher education institutions who go to a test optional moment are going to evaluate a student's readiness for a degree at their university, which is supposed to ready them for the world in which they are going to emerge. And there's a part of me that really wonders whether or not the testing that we have right now really is able to accurately predict students' skills for the 21st century. If you look at the list of 21st century skills, how much do the tests that students take? And I'm talking about the SAT, the ACT, but also the UK tests. All of these tests. How much do they accurately predict? The collaborative skills, the critical thinking skills, all of that we know students are going to need in the big wide world that they face. Not that we faced or face, but that they will face. And so I'm really interested to see how testing adapts to this test optional movement. And, you know, again, the test optional movement is lovely, but particularly for international audiences, there has to be an understanding of the cultural importance of testing within each of these cultures. And that's a hurdle that counselors are going to need to help families understand. I mean, test optional is anxiety producing for students who live in cultures where tests define who you are. And I think there's a whole cultural competency piece that we need to be aware of as counselors in helping students, particularly who are applying to the US, understand this test optional movement.
Yeah, well, I don't think we need to argue about that. I agree with you. And I think the thing that we're always trying to explain to people, despite a lot of what we do is helping students get through these tests, we're always trying to say to people that testing is, first of all, not the only thing and not the most important thing in your applications. And in some cases, it might not be the most appropriate thing at all. And there are students who focus very, very heavily on testing, which is fine up to a point, because after that, everything else is much more important. And trying to counsel students and parents over that hurdle and say, look, getting perfect grades is not actually the thing that's going to get you in. So I think the interesting thing from my perspective is that things, although there's a big move towards test optional, that doesn't actually change what we say about holistic applications to students, in that the testing might still form part of your application. It might not. There are other things you need to think about regardless. Yeah,
I agree. Yeah, I mean, it's clearly in the US, testing is one part of a holistic application. If you are applying to schools where you are holistically reviewed. But there are other countries to which our students are applying where testing it's still very much at the forefront, and is important. And then, you know, and for us here at ASL, that means really careful counseling, and so that students get to the university process with multiple options, that we haven't closed any doors by the choices that they've made back, you know, in the school.
Great. Okay, we've got a few minutes left. There is one question that hasn't been answered here directly, although I think you've kind of answered it in other ways, which is, how do you get students and parents to move past the obvious Ivy League or top 10 name universities? Now, you've talked about encouraging students to think widely about their options, but there is a fixation with certain named universities, at least at the start of the process. How do you overcome that?
So again, I think it's really important to honor students' dreams. And so I will never say to a student, oh, you know, you shouldn't apply to that university. And I don't think it's in anybody's interest to crush dreams like that. I do think it's important and to say to students, absolutely, you know, we will absolutely apply to, you know, the dream universities, the dream schools, things like that. But my job is to make sure that at the end of the day, you have a good set of choices in front of you when it comes to April of your senior year. And to that end, I am going to suggest that we have a broad list of schools that represent, you know, that all of which you love and you think you're going to be successful at, and that includes, you know, those top ranked schools, but also includes some schools that I'm fairly sure, you know, you're going to not only get into, but you might get a scholarship there, and you might get into the honors program and things like that. So I think first and foremost, it's really important to honor dreams. And certainly at the beginning of the process, that's super important to honor students' dreams. I think once you get all the data from the junior year, you've got the junior year GPA, you've got, you know, the AP scores, you've got the, well, not this year, but most years you have, you know, at least one or two, you know, scores from tests. Then you can begin to say, okay, well, now let's look at the data that we have and let's measure it against the data that we have for ASL students who have applied to these schools. And once you begin showing them we use Maya Learning, so there are wonderful scattergrams on there, and you can say, all right, so here's the data, and now let's really look and make sure that we have a list where you're above the line, and yes, there are going to be some reach schools where you're a little below the line, and where you're right on the line. So I think that at the outset, it's really important to honor dreams. We hear lots of stories about people who were told that they should never apply to that school. I think Michelle Obama got that message from her counselor. But I do think that one can begin to inject some realism and with good data. Once you have good data to share, and by the time that they're sort of really beginning to make decisions about early decision and early action, often they have heard messages from the admissions officers and from other people that yes, we only take 5% of our applicants, and they begin to there is some realism that begins to trickle in.
Yeah, well, that is great advice, and a good place to stop, because it allows me to say that the next time I'll be speaking with you or to you is at our conference, which is on Monday for high school counsellors, and Anne and I will be on a panel with the ACT, so I hope you won't give them too hard a time. We'll be talking about standardised testing, but also Anne and I, along with a couple of other people, will be giving a talk for the now virtual International ACAC in July. So hopefully people will tune in for that, and we'll be talking a lot about data during that talk. But Anne, apart from those two things, where else will people be able to see you next, if they want to?
So I'm very much hoping that that CIS will happen in November. It's supposed to be happening in Ireland, but I'm betting that it will go virtual. So I'm hoping there will be that. NACAC looks like it's not going to be a possibility for me this year because we will be here in London, hopefully doing our virtual college fair. So we'll see.
Great. Okay, well, Anne, all that remains to be said is thank you very much again for joining us. It's been a wonderful hour of hearing everything that I could possibly want to know about university applications and about your background. I'm sure everyone is very appreciative for your time. So thank you. So I'm going to end the video now, but hopefully you'll stay online and have a quick chat with me, Anne.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Thank you.